Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining the current installment of the monthly DATAVERSITY webinar series, Real World Data Governance with Bob Seiner. Today, Bob will discuss the role of data governance in facilitating AI and digital transformation, sponsored by Informatica and Reltio. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom defaults the chat to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. For questions, we'll be collecting them via the Q&A section. And to find the chat in the Q&A panels, you can find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen to activate those features. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of the session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me turn it over to Scott for a brief word from our first sponsor, Informatica. Scott, hello and welcome.
Hi, my name is Scott Hayes. I am with Informatica. Let me share a screen real quick. Great. So I just wanted to talk very briefly. We'll talk about Informatica's cloud offering, our Intelligent Data Management Cloud, or IDMC. It contains microservices for all sorts of different data management needs, like the data catalog, like governance, master data management, data integration, data quality. So since the subject matter is focused on data governance, I thought I would take a minute and just show you a little bit of our data governance offering. You know, any data governance tool is really going to be a place to organize all of your data assets, things like business assets like glossary terms and policies and projects, as well as technical assets like tables, views, columns, etc. But really, it's about how they relate to each other that really where you start to get the power, such as, you know, tables. How do business terms relate to these tables? Which terms are related to these? Or which data quality is related to business terms, you know, these business assets. And I can even drill down and see which quality checks are being done across, in this case, a particular business term. Even things like, how does a business term relate to reference data? So if I have reference data, how does that relate to it? So I can start to drill down how these things relate. And even data flow, such as a lineage. So how does the data flow? So you really want a tool that can automatically pull this lineage from different sources. So here you can see I'm looking at Snowflake and Databricks as examples here, but I can really see how it flows throughout the organization and even drill down into the technical jargon as well, that the system was actually able to parse all that information and glean all this information automatically and show that throughout the organization. One of the things that we're really proud of is we're trying to make the data more accessible to more of your consumers. So to that end, we actually have a microservice called Claire GPT, which is, as the name implies, it is a natural language GPT. So you can actually start to ask your data questions. So you can actually start to see, hey, I want to know where my Snowflake sources are, et cetera. And I can even start to drill down into things like, what did I do for this one? I wanted to say, hey, give me a count based on area codes, even though the data itself doesn't split up area codes, and it'll actually do this work for me and tell me the assumptions that it's doing. It's saying, hey, I'm assuming that the area code is going to be that first 3 digit. If it's not, you can tell me. But this is what it's done. So I didn't have to do any additional data parsing for this. Really, I gave it access to my data. I gave it permission, so who's allowed to use these types of tools. And based on the metadata, it will now go and pull that data and provide some insights through your organization. So I just wanted to do very briefly, so maybe get some folks excited, and please definitely reach out to us. But that's all I really wanted to talk about from Informatica's standpoint. Please give us a call and we can show you more. Shannon?
Scott, thank you so much for kicking us off in such a great way. And thanks to Informatica for sponsoring today's webinar and helping make these webinars happen. And if you have any questions for Scott, feel free to submit them in the Q&A panel, as he will likewise be joining us for the Q&A portion of the webinar at the end. Now, let me turn it over to Matt for a brief word from our second sponsor, Reltio. Matt, hello and welcome.
Hello, Shannon. Hello, everybody else. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. Let's go into slideshow mode. So as a kind of a change of pace from what Scott was sharing with us just a few minutes ago, I'm going to talk about Reltio's role here, what we think our role is across our various customers in helping them govern their data in support of AI and digital transformations more generally. So, you know, where I think we are, and this is the Reltio perspective, is for a while now, there have been waves of evolution taking place, disrupting our world, basically. And digital transformation has been one of those. And many customers are at various points along that journey. And now we think there's kind of a game changer in the form of agentic AI and the need to automate even further than we've been able to do previously. And of course, data and the governance of data plays a huge role in all of that. So thinking about where we are is a world where things are tending to go wrong. Nobody wants to be in the headline as you know, I tried agentic and it didn't quite do what I wanted it to. Nobody really also wants to get left behind. And so when we think about these news articles, I'm focusing on this one that was recently in the Independent newspaper, and it focused in on this idea of hallucinations, which is a term we're probably all familiar with, and how they tend to happen when the AI is uncertain about how to answer a particular question. So our argument here at Reltio really is that in order to make this work and make it work properly, reliably, repeatably, and for us all to get the level of confidence that we need, you're going to need a combination of things to make sure that the machine does not stray from the path we want it to go down. So that we think means tight prompting, appropriate context, what's going on, and complete trusted data as a backbone. So, you know, what does the world really look like? Agentic AI comes along and says, hey, I'm this new thing that in real time needs access to reliable data. And I think the perspective is, well, that's not very easy to achieve. So the role of Reltio is really to come along and say, okay, we need to help you break down these silos, these barriers that have always existed in preventing us to enjoy digital transformation as easily as we might otherwise want, and how that same problem manifests as what we would say is the kryptonite of successful AI strategies. You've got disconnected data, it's all over the place. Which version of the truth do you trust? So up steps our hero in the form of what we think is the Reltio platform here, being able to connect in as much as real time as is at all possible, given the ecosystem and the nature of the various platforms and their ages and original purposes and whatever band-aids we've applied to them. We need to be put in a position where at the pace that you need it to operate and at the scale that you need it to operate securely with some of your most mission critical but also trusted data, you need to be able to plug in something that is going to bridge that gap and provide some unified home that you can reliably go to get answers to digital questions, but answers, of course, very importantly now, given the context, to agentic questions. So introducing the Reltio Intelligent Data Graph, if we read this from left to right, it's the ability to plug into that ecosystem of applications, to leverage wherever possible real-time APIs, to get those data ingested as quickly and easily as possible, so that we can build out a connected graph internally in Reltio that doesn't just consist of objects, the nouns, if you will, in the world of our large language models, but also starts to give us a really reliable set of adjectives to describe those nouns appropriately, whether those are slower or faster moving attributes that we need to update on an ongoing basis, but also this latest thing I just pulled out here, what we call interactions. in Reltio, the fact that things are happening, verbs are playing out in the context of this ecosystem. And those verbs represent people purchasing, browsing, clicking, calling, doing other things that are materially useful when we can stitch them all together and join them all up into a holistic 360-degree view, to coin the phrase that's been out there for quite some time. So giving shape to that, Reltio invites you to give life to entities, to relationships between those entities in an open-ended way, and to interactions that get you the context, or more importantly, get the agentic AI the context that it's going to need, together with all of this reliable data, so that it can take action in an automated way that you want it to. And building this out one more click here, Reltio has gone so far now as to go GA with what we call an MCP server. So for those of you unfamiliar with that, that means Model Context Protocol. And what that then opens up is two different real categories of agentic application onto your data. The first, and probably more important in terms of business objectives, is to be able to leverage these data for my overarching business purposes and the automations that I want to be able to put in place, whether it's customer journey, next best action, those kinds of things. But then also introspectively, the process of governing these data is by no means simple. We're talking about all sorts of different match rules, all sorts of different match algorithms, the variety and quality of data that we need to deal with. So data governance agents can be introspecting on the process itself, uncovering data quality issues, and to whatever extent is possible, automating the process of fixing those data. So whether it's organizational data that is not quite in the shape that we want it to be in, doesn't pass muster, the idea that we can go out and run in the background agents that do web searches that go to the variety of trusted sources, including the organization's own website, and can come back and actively enrich these data to a greater degree with better confidence than previously. And then also in the world of matching and merging, the idea that I might be suggesting two profiles, the LPCH at certain address in Palo Alto and the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. Now, those are not easy things to put algorithms around to automate the process of matching and merging. But agentic comes along together with large language model like semantic comparisons and says we can make that process easier, and I can facilitate the gathering of sufficient data to make the whole process of data stewardship as easy as it can possibly be, given that it's actually never easy, but at least taking away some of the grunt work. So kind of wrapping up here, we would argue that Reltio's position is at the heart of the ecosystem, powering not just agentic AI, but any of the other digital transformations and workflows that you're looking to automate, leveraging as much as possible, wherever it makes sense, real-time data that's available at very high scale, very, very low latencies. And then here's just an example of some customers in various areas of their own organizations that are fulfilling different missions using Reltio already. Of course, it's early days for agentic, so most of this is really a representation of the digital transformation stories at these customers, and agentic solutions in these areas is a work in progress. And that's pretty much everything I was hoping to say, at least proactively. Looking forward to the questions and answers.
Matt, thank you so much for another great presentation. And thanks to Reltio for also sponsoring today's webinar and helping to make these webinars happen. And if you have any questions for Matt, feel free to submit them in the Q&A panel, as he will likewise be joining us in the Q&A portion of the webinar at the end. Now, let me introduce you our speaker for the series, Bob Seiner. Bob is the president and principal of KIK Consulting and Educational Services and the publisher emeritus of the data administration newsletter, tdan.com. Bob specializes in non-invasive data governance, data stewardship, and metadata management solutions. And with that, I'll give the floor to Bob to start his presentation. And Bob, hello and welcome.
Hi, Shannon. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
You can hear me okay. Great. That's always the first step. First, I wanted to thank Scott, and I wanted to thank Matt very much for sponsoring today's webinar. It's always great to have you with us. This is a really, as I always say, it seems when Shannon and I are doing the webinars together, this is a topic that we haven't even addressed in all the years that we've been doing the real world data governance series. And it's kind of interesting where the topic came from. I was speaking at a DATAVERSITY event, and I had a data leader within an organization kind of pull me aside and say, you know, look, we already have governance, we already have security, we already have policies, you know, we're already a pretty ethical company. They asked me to tell them in a few words what the role of data governance was in facilitating AI and facilitating their digital transformation. So I'm going to use more than a few words over the next 40 minutes or so as I go through my session here, and then we'll come back and we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. But I'm going to try to answer the question of what is the role that data governance needs to play in facilitating things that every organization seems to be going through right now with the AI and the digital transformation. And just as a reminder, this is the 165th episode in the Real World Data Governance series. We're going to be ending the series at the end of the year, so hopefully you'll come back and join us for episodes 166 and episodes 167. We got some great subjects here. I'll talk about those, but again, we're counting it down. We're at 3 from the end at this point. So before I get started, there's a couple of things I want to share with you, and I always kind of start out my parts of the webinars this way. I'm involved in a lot of different things. We've had this monthly webinar series with DATAVERSITY for 14 years. And next month, we're going to be, it's always on the third Thursday, we'll be talking about advanced techniques for metadata-driven data governance. I think the things that Matt and Scott both talked about, the need to have the metadata to help to drive governance, to drive AI, to drive digital transformations is really important. So I hope you'll join us next month on the third Thursday for that, for the 166th episode in the series. I talk about non-invasive data governance a lot. I've written several books on the subject. The most recent non-invasive data governance unleashed, and that was published earlier this year. I also have some online learning plans available through DATAVERSITY, so please go to the DATAVERSITY Training Center to see them. The name of my consulting business is KIK Consulting and Educational Services. KIK stands for Knowledge is King. It's better than using my initials. And in my spare time, I'm also faculty at Carnegie Mellon University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in their Chief Data and AI Officer program. So that one picture that kind of appeared on the screen, coming soon, for those of you that are connected to me on LinkedIn and you see the things that I've been writing and posting recently, that's kind of a tickler as to something that's going to be announced real soon about data catalysts and data spark plugs and those types of things. How can we make data governance more of a common practice within organizations? All right, so in my webinar series, typically what I've done is I've taken 4 subjects and I've spent somewhere around 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less than each for each of the top 4 subjects. And then I like to wrap up the webinars by going through some case studies. And I'm going to do that again today. So hopefully I'll leave enough time that we can spend a little bit of time at least digging into those case studies of how organizations are using governance to enable things like digital transformations and AI transformations in their organizations. So lots of good topics. We're going to talk about some strategies, talk about balancing innovation with governance oversight. It seems to be a big issue at a lot of organizations. We're really going to talk about the role of data governance in facilitating these transformations that are taking place in our organizations. I always start with a definition of governance and of stewardship. And if you've been attending these webinars, my definition keeps getting shorter and shorter. And it was always the execution and enforcement of authority over the management of data and data-related assets, or it was even longer than that. But I think that now with AI, and AI has been around for a while, and information governance and risk governance, that we really need to focus on the definition of what governance means, what governing means. And the definition that I use here is it's the execution and enforcement of authority. At the end of the day, the rules, the laws, the policies, they're out there to assist you to execute and enforce authority. So that's my definition. And even though I talk about trying to implement data governance in non-invasive ways, I'm not going to talk about that a lot here today. At the end of the day, governance requires you to execute and enforce authority. Stewardship, I say it's the formalized accountability. Been known to say everybody in the organization that has a relationship to the data that is being held accountable for that relationship to the data, they're stewards. Everybody is a steward. And organizations need to recognize that in order to really improve how governance is going to facilitate these transformations in your organization. So if that first definition is true, then the definition of data governance is the execution and enforcement of authority over data. And the definition of AI governance is the execution and enforcement of authority over AI. And you could put risk in there, and you could put anything that you want to govern. But basically, at the end of the day, we need to execute and enforce authority over that data. A couple more definitions just to go through with you quickly. And the first one is, and I'm going to let you just read them on the screen. But the first one is the AI transformation. And what do we define an AI transformation as? And what do we define a digital transformation as? As I was trying to find a really good definition for digital transformation, I was being kind of pointed towards a definition of data transformation. So I'm using data transformation on the screen here, and in the table, the bottom, you'll see I superimposed the word digital over the data transformation. When we talk about a digital transformation, it has to do with AI. AI doesn't care where it gets its data from, whether it's structured data or unstructured or semi-structured data. So anything that is in a digital format, I've kind of used these definitions. I focus more on the data transformation than the digital transformation, but I think they're both relatively similar. So when we talk about, again, you can look at the definitions. It's the AI transformation is a deliberate act of governing and enabling data. Boy, that seems a lot like the definition of a digital transformation or a data transformation, which is deliberately governing, refining, and elevating data so that it can serve a purpose, serve the purpose that you need it to serve in your organization. Okay, I've also added to my webinars kind of before we get started. I just want to kind of go through these quickly with you. I just want you to take a second and kind of sit back, and we'll press on the icon in the middle. Close your eyes for a minute. Think about what would an AI transformation in your organization look like if you didn't have any governance? Okay, you can open your eyes now. Here's a list of 6 different bullets of things that you can expect to happen if your AI transformation is left ungoverned. And again, don't want to read through them all. You can look at them, trust erodes, teams waste time. Just take a look through them. And that's just kind of a quick hit list of things that you can expect to happen in your organization if your AI transformation efforts are not governed. Now close your eyes again for a minute and do the same thing for the digital transformation without governance. What's the digital transformation going to look like if you have a complete lack of governance in your organization? This is an issue that we've been dealing with forever because we're just all now getting into a situation where the organizations that we're working for or working with are seriously considering governance as a mainstay within their organization. So what are all the problems we've been having with data? We've been growing data silos. We've had inconsistent definitions. We've had poor data quality, all of these things. So imagine again, if we're going to talk about the role of governance in facilitating these things, we want to just kind of imagine for a minute what would happen to these transformation efforts if you had no governance at all. And it's not pretty, but you know what? It's reality. It's what's happening right now in a lot of organizations. And the third, before we get started here, is the grocery store analogy. Is if you leave even the items and the content within a grocery store, you leave that ungoverned. There's no labels, there's no trust, there's wasted time finding the information or finding the products that you need. And as you grow your grocery store, that chaos is only going to scale poorly. So just keep those in mind as we start to dive into the topics of the day, which are, the first one is, well, what is the role of data governance in AI and digital transformations? So I'm going to go through a few of these, and really this is the takeaway slide for this section of the presentation. I'm going to take each of these bullet points and dissect it a little bit further and perhaps give you some talking points that you can share with people, leaders within your organization to make the case for why, answering the question like I answered at that DATAVERSITY conference a while back of, can you tell me in a few words what the role of governance is? Well, it's the foundation that makes AI and digital transformation sustainable. Without governed data, well, again, I'm not going to read all these to you. AI just automates errors. You need to have trusted data. You need to have a digital strategy that is not going to fail your organization, because it's certainly going to fail if the data is inconsistent. And it's all those things that I asked you to close your eyes and imagine if your digital strategy is completely ungoverned. So let's go through each of these real quickly, and then I certainly want to leave time at the end to go through the case studies and open the floor up for some Q&A with with my friends at the sponsors who just spoke a little while ago. So one of the first roles for data governance is that it really becomes the foundation that makes any transformation sustainable. Again, if you're going to, in organizations where there's pockets of governance, pockets of AI going on, and they're all independent, and there's nobody that's kind of looking at what's the foundation of the data, the trust of the data. We know that one of the roles of governance is that it becomes that foundation that makes these digital platforms and the AI platforms sustainable and trustable within the organization. I love what Matt said earlier on about completely trusted data. That's what we're trying to get to, the point where the data is completely trusted. Another role of governance in AI and digital transformation is that if you don't have governed data feeding these solutions in your organization, they're basically just automating bad data. And it's bad data in, bad data out. And it only becomes more and more risky to your organization if people are starting to make decisions on data that they don't trust, data that has not been vetted, data that has been shown to not be of high quality, or at least the quality that the organization needs to make decisions appropriately. Another role of data governance in these transformations is that it gives credibility and it gives business value to the data that's going to feed these models. And you can see from the sub bullets here, trustworthy data builds trustworthy AI. Credible AI, things that are going to work well for your organization, they start with credible data. I don't think that's ever a definition that ever been a definition that I've shared before about credible data. But credible data, data that's trusted, data that's of high quality, data that people have confidence in. Again, another one of the roles of governance in these transformations is that it gives credibility to the data, it gives credibility to the business value that's going to come from these solutions. Another role is that if your digital strategy is going to fail, if the data is inconsistent. So basically at the beginning, at the heart of any data strategy in an organization, at least these days, it seems as though they're focusing on governance. And a digital strategy can only be as strong as the data behind it. So it makes sense that these strategies, that the data strategy, the digital strategy focuses on governance as playing a core role in the facilitating of these new technologies. And the last one I want to share with you is that governance shifts the transformation from being risky, everybody off doing their own things, to building some consistency in the definition of the data, the production of the data, the usage of the data. So another role of governance is that it shifts the transformation from being risky to being repeatable within your organization. All right, the next subject that I want to go over here with you quickly is just to share with you some strategies, some governing strategies that will support these different initiatives, these digital initiatives and AI initiatives. And as Shannon mentioned at the earlier part of the session in the introduction, and as I mentioned with the books that I've written, I talk a lot about non-invasive governance. And I'm just going to kind of go through some governing strategies. One of them is to try to stay non-invasive in your approach. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. To develop quick wins, to embed accountability into the things that people are presently doing. and into aligning the practices. Again, this is the one takeaway slide from this section that has all the key points. I want to go through them quickly with you. And so let's just talk about non-invasive data governance for a minute. Non-invasive data governance, the end result, the goal of non-invasive governance is the same as the role or the goal of invasive governance. It's to execute and enforce authority over the data. The idea of being non-invasive is that we kind of build it into the things that people are doing. People are already defining, producing, and using data. If they're being held accountable for how they define, produce, and use data, it's not a new job. It's basically just a clearer lens on the things that they're already responsible for. And again, the non-invasive strategies, build on the things that you already have in your organization. Governance is not new. Governance is taking place. It might be very informal, and because it's informal, it's inefficient, ineffective. Build on the levels of governance that are already taking place in your organization, because I can guarantee you that there's already levels of governance taking place, whether it's in pockets or it's being called something different. Look to build on what you already have. That's one of the core tenets of the idea of being non-invasive. Look for quick wins. Organizations, especially these days, are not willing to wait for results. So start small in order to be able to move fast, show value for the things in your organization that matter the most, and turn that momentum into a movement within your organization where you're not just looking at solving individual problems. We're really building a movement for how we're going to govern data associated with our AI and digital initiatives moving forward. Another strategy, and this really has to do with the non-invasive approach as well, which is you got to embed accountability into things that are already taking place in your organization. So it says here, embedding accountability into the culture sustains digital progress. And that means that once people understand their role with the data and they decide to accept this as their level of accountability and responsibility around the data, it really helps to sustain some digital progress within your organization. Don't sell accountability as something that's over and above what they're presently doing. Make it part of their daily work. Focus on the culture, changing people's behavior. Consistency builds that trust and momentum that organizations are trying to build as they're building out their governance and their governing initiatives around AI and digital transformation. And another strategy is to make sure that you align the things that you're doing with governance with the existing rhythm of your organization. So fit governance into your established routines. All of these routines and these processes and procedures, they are a form of governance. They are getting the right people to do the right things at the right time. Let's build governance into things that people are already doing. If they're not successful, we can make changes to them, but let's make certain that we're at least governing the processes that we already have in our organization. So again, aligning the practices with this existing rhythm that's taking place within your organization. Start early. This also has to do with the quick wins. Demonstrate value early. Show results that matter to the business. Turn these victories into stories that you tell to people in the organization who will then come to you and say, hey, if you could do this for that initiative, can you help to do this for our initiative as well? So turn the victories into visible stories and use that momentum to scale change across the organization. All right, the next subject I wanted to talk about, and I just wanted to provide some truth points here. So I might go through these slides relatively quickly just to get to the idea of balancing innovation with governance and then to get to the case studies. But I'm just going to throw out some talking points to you in terms of how are we going to manage the data responsibly in the AI-driven environments. We're going to do it through formal governance in our organization. And again, this slide tells you everything that you need to know about this subject, or at least gives you the main talking points where AI depends on the quality of the data. You know these things. You're hearing these things from other webinars and presentations, that poorly governed data introduces bias. Again, let's kind of walk through each of these quickly. And I'm just going to give you a second to read through what some of the talking points are in terms of AI depending on the quality of the data that it consumes. Like it says at the bottom line here, quality data transforms AI from a guessing game into a trusted guide for your organization. Another item in here is that poorly governed data introduces bias and amplifies risk. If we've heard this once, we've heard this 1,000 times. The question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to take our governance program and help to formalize accountability for the management of data and execute and enforce authority over that data, and do that in such a way that it reduces the chances that we're going to have data that's going to be biased, and it's going to move us in a direction away from amplifying risk in our organization. Another point here is that governance ensures data is consistent, ethical, and transparent. Again, these are talking points to be able to take to your organization to say, you know what, if you're really asking the question of what the role of governance is in where we're spending our money and where we're focusing our attention, maybe there's some talking points in here that will help you to carry that message to the leaders of your organization. Responsible practices make AI outputs reliable and explainable. All these things are, again, really important to the organization. Trustworthy data is the only path to trustworthy AI. I don't think anybody is telling you that in your organization that you will have trustworthy AI that you can depend on if your data is, pardon my language here, is crap. It's not trusted. If your data is not trusted, neither can AI. So AI inherits that integrity from wherever it's getting its data from, whether it's a structured data source or an unstructured data source. So trust in AI is built, one reliable data point at a time. And in many organizations, it's starting governance. You're not going to flip a switch and have governance come on for all of your data sources. Focus on making each data point reliable in its own right, and then get them to work together. And that's really going to be the basis of which you're going to build trustworthy AI within your organization. And the last subject that I want to touch on with you before I go through the case studies with you is, and I hear this from many of the organizations that I have the honor and the pleasure to work with, is that they want to be innovative. They're doing everything that they can to be innovative. They're using AI and they're using their new digital platforms or their digital platforms to become innovative, but they also want to then have governance oversight over that data. So just a couple things to go through with you quickly is that in our organizations, we need to stop viewing innovation and governance as being enemies and view them as in ways that they can actually partner and work together. And the oversight provides the guide rails that you need. Governance, one of the terms I'm using a lot these days is that governance is a catalyst. It can accelerate things to happen within your organization. And so let's kind of change the narrative, what we're talking about with governance. And instead of talking about governance being something that's going to slow us down or prevent us from doing things, change the narrative to say governance is really accelerating the organization for safe experimentation, all of these types of things. So let's kind of walk through these real quickly and with you as well. I didn't know until I put this webinar together that Pac-Man symbol that just popped up on the screen, that's referred to as the enemy in the Pac-Man game. So let's talk about innovation and governance are partners. They're not enemies. So integrate governance into your projects. Use governance to prioritize the appropriate sources, those data points that you're spending time governing on, formally governing so that they have good sound definition, production, and use of that data. Build cross-functional innovation and governance teams that kind of bring together innovation and governance, and they're not viewed as being opposing forces within your organization. The oversight, again, to balance innovation with oversight, the oversight provides those guide rails. And I've used that term many times in past webinars, the guide rails to keep your AI, to keep your digital transformations on course. So clear data definition, It's going to clear data usage policies is going to help establishing checkpoints to review quality, creating feedback loops between the people that are doing the innovation and the people that are governing the data or active in leading governance efforts within the organization. Governance, another thing to consider when we're talking about balancing innovation with governance oversight is that governance accelerates safe experiment with data. Again, that was my point I mentioned earlier, as a catalyst, as the spark to make things happen in the organization. A lot of people were talking about how data governance, that just the term governance is viewed negatively in a lot of organizations. And they suggested that we use the term enablement, that having better data, having trusted data is going to enable us to do these things. I want to take it one step further and say it's not just an enabler. That's a very passive way to look at things. It's really that spark, it's that catalyst, that accelerator to make things happen within your organization. So if we can again link governance and the governance of data and the governance of AI to making positive things happen within the organization, it's going to take us a great way towards balancing innovation with governance oversight as we're talking about this to people within our organizations. Another one is without oversight, being fast, and everybody wants to be fast and not only innovative, but fast with their results. If we create it fast and we create it in an ungoverned way, it also becomes fragile. It also becomes risky to the organization. So some of the things that we can do to balance innovation with oversight is to embed governance reviews within the timelines for this innovation. We can prioritize, that we want to keep it. We're building a stable environment here across the organization, kind of build that into and alongside the speed and the goals that your organization is trying to achieve. Develop really resilience plans for innovative solutions. Again, we don't want to just do this fast. We want to do it as fast as we can, but we want to make certain that the data is trustworthy, the quality is high, that people can get the value out of their AI and digital solutions that we're creating. Balance creates innovation that's bold and sustainable. I've talked about this a little bit already today. We're blending your goals with your governance metrics, encouraging collaboration between the people that are responsible for the innovation and your governance leaders, creating a culture within the organization. Data governance is all about people's behavior. We need to create a culture that can be both agile and accountable for the management of the data as we're feeding these different solutions within our organization. So, okay, I have a couple minutes left here, and I know I've gone through some of these things quickly. So if you have questions, please pose them in the Q&A area, and we'll certainly get to as many of them as we can. And I'll try to address ones that if we don't get to them during the Q&A time. I was thinking about how governance has enabled organizations that I've worked with to do the things that they're trying to do, the digital transformations, the AI transformations taking place in the organization. So I just kind of lumped them into 5 different categories. And I'm going to go through them quickly with you. I want to talk about an organization that succeeded when they kind of used that concept of using governance as a catalyst or an accelerant in the organization rather than just as an enabler to do things within the organization. I'm going to talk about an organization that turned what they literally referred to as data chaos into clarity. And then they applied that into some real projects. Another organization formalized accountability that was already happening informally. Again, one of the core tenets of the non-invasive approach is you're already governing. There's people that already have accountability for defining, producing, and using data. We need to recognize who those people are and formalize that accountability instead of handing it to them as something that's over and above the things that they're already doing. Talk about an organization where their digital transformation has actually stuck around for years because they've used governance as a core component of that to make it real across the organization. And then I'll talk about quickly about an organization that improved their results when they not only enabled governance, but they used it to help control and manage innovation. So just to go through them quickly, for each of these case studies, I kind of list a challenge. This is specifically what the challenge was for this organization. This is the approach that they used. This organization that used the Catalyst, they used the non-invasive data governance framework that I wrote about in my second book. They faced stalled effort. They used initiatives by using governance as a catalyst to their organization. Again, a challenge in the approach and the results for an organization that literally defined their data situation as being data chaos. So they told me they were bogged down by the data chaos. They adopted a governance framework, which was similar to the non-invasive one, but they just adopted a framework that would work for their organization. And basically their results was they wanted to deliver solutions faster and with greater confidence. So they had chaos. They used governance to kind of clear up that chaos into something that's beneficial to the organization. I talk a lot about organizations that have formalized accountability because there's already accountability in your organization. There's already people defining data who may be accountable for how they're defining data. There's certainly people producing data. The question is, are they being held accountable for how they're producing data? Certainly people are more these days being held accountable for how they're using data, but this organization focused on implementing stewardship that went from this informal accountability, this inefficient and ineffective accountability, to formalizing who does what with the data. So again, they introduced a stewardship program. They collaborated more effectively when they had actually formalized who was accountable for defining, producing, and using the different data, the critical data assets across the organization. Another organization where the digital, and this is the last case study I want to share with you, is where the digital transformation stuck because they used governance to kind of make it real to people within the organization. And their challenge was that projects were stalling. They again implemented, you can see a consistency in the approach that was used by these organizations in these case studies. They implemented a governance framework that was effective for their organization. So when we step back and we think, what's the role of data governance in facilitating these transformations? Well, just from these examples, you can see that implementing a formal governance framework has enabled these organizations to achieve the results that I'm sharing with you on these slides here as well. So for this organization, they were able to move forward with some of these projects because they had confidence in who did what with the data across the organization. So I know I went through some of these things quickly with you. And again, I thank the sponsors from today. The things I talked about were kind of in general terms what the role of governance is in these different transformations taking place in our organization. I shared with you some governing strategies, including staying non-invasive, embedding it, accountability into your organization. We talked about managing data responsibly, balancing. Everybody wants to be innovative, balancing innovation with governance oversight. And then I shared just a handful of kind of quick case studies with you, examples of organizations that have used governance to enable things like digital transformations in their organizations. So thank you very much for sitting through the session. This is how you can reach out to me. I've provided my LinkedIn address here because when these webinars cease to exist, you can still follow me on LinkedIn and see what I'm writing about and what I'm talking about in terms of data governance and data management and all of these things. So thank you again. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Shannon and see if we have any questions today.
We do have questions coming in already. And if you have questions for Bob or Matt or Scott, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel of your screen. And I'm going to start with a question here for Scott. This came in during your presentation. How does Informatica and Cleaver take advantage of their data lineage capability?
Certainly Informatica's data lineage capability. First of all, it's automation. So the ability to find this lineage automatically is a key feature in that. And then obviously do you use that lineage to discover downstream effects So you'll be able to find what is affecting things upstream and downstream, as well as when you incorporate data quality into that as well, you can see how quality is flowing through the organization as well. So as data moves from for example, medallion architecture is very popular. So as you can see, as things go from a bronze to a silver to a gold, is the data quality improving, et cetera? How is that flowing through the organization?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so this came in for during your presentation, Bob, but I'll ask all three of you, why is the definition of digital transformation using data transformation? Do you consider them to be the same thing?
Well, I'll touch that first, and then I'd love to hear from Scott and Matt as well. Um, I think they can basically be used interchangeably. A lot of it really depends on your definition of what data is. And data can be structured, unstructured. It can be audio, it can be video, it can be in a lot of different formats. It can be in semi-structured data. So that's all the digital representations of the data. So I guess I haven't really put a whole lot of thought into this, but I think you can probably, at least in my mind, use the terms digital transformation and data transformations interchangeably. I think they're really, what are you transforming digitally that's not data? It would be my question.
I agree, Bob. In my experience, I've seen that those terms pretty interchangeable as well.
Yeah, just lending the Reltio perspective here, I'd say that digital transformation, takes the form of business initiatives that use technology to achieve the objectives here. And I think instead of thinking about data transformation, we should think about data activation. The data exists, they come into existence through whatever processes exist within the business. And it's our responsibility to, through the governance that we've been talking about here, bring them together in a controlled way and make sure we understand the context and understand which we should use to operate on and fulfill our objectives, whether those are digital or AI in nature.
I really like that. I really like what you said, Matt, because we do need to think of it from a business perspective. And if it's just data transformation, perhaps it sounds just a little bit more technical than what we're implying for the organization. So I can be persuaded.
I love it. A good healthy discussion. Uh, so if we have data governance that covers AI, why do we need AI data governance?
Why do we need, I don't know what AI data governance is. I don't know what master data governance is. I don't know what big data governance is. I know what data, this is again, the world according to my thought process. It's all data governance. So AI governance, as I mentioned on an early, or AI transformation and AI governance is really governing your AI initiatives. I think the things that Matt talked about with the digital transformation, it's managing the business use of AI within the organization. You need to govern AI. You don't need to call it AI data governance because data governance itself should handle that. AI governance is governing the effective use of AI, in my mind.
I agree. I think these
Yep.
are those same two layers that we were just referring to before, just wrapped up in different language.
Yep.
And I think the terminology has sort of come from as organizations and as far as tools are starting to envelop that and getting better and better at not just traditional, for lack of a better word, governance of of business concepts and technical concepts, but also the concepts for organizations that are building AI models, et cetera. How do we govern not only the data that those models use, et cetera, but how do we govern the models themselves and how they are transitioning throughout the organization? So I think that term sort of started coming to sort of differentiate itself to say, can this tool handle AI governance? Can this tool not handle AI governance? But yeah, Bob, you're 100% right. It's really just part of the larger governance umbrella. It should be included. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if there's a right and wrong
Well,
answer, for it, but I'm not sure. I just think that calling it AI data governance is unnecessary. You can call it AI governance, govern your AI, but then govern your data so that it is all the things that we talked about
Yeah,
earlier in the session here.
it's connected. Yeah, 100%.
So many great questions coming in here, and we'll get to as many as we can. Would it be valuable and non-invasive to enable the governance organization to understand changes in data use of customers, human and machine? A governance continuous improvement loop based on actual use, if you will.
I would think without a doubt. I said the more you know about how the data is being used in your organization, the better you can govern toward it. And if my understanding of the question is correct, I'm not sure it has to do. Well, I guess from the non-invasive nature of it is if you can capture that behavior and you can capture the changes that are necessary in a way that is not intruding on people, you can just view the behavior. I would think AI would be a way to be able to do that, to view and see what types of behaviors are taking place. I'm not sure that non-invasive has a whole lot to do with it, but and then these questions are great that are coming in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. This kind of seems to my mind to jump in and invite the discussion of the category of data observability to some extent, and the idea that if I can determine which of my data are being used and in what quantities and for what purposes, I can certainly treat that as the opportunity in a feedback loop to say, where should I be paying my most attention and
Right.
directing the effort, whether it's agentic, stewardship, or otherwise, to say, this is the most popular, the most valuable data that I've got. Therefore, let me emphasize it further.
Yeah, well put.
Agreed. So, Bob, you said data governance isn't a switch, can't happen overnight in terms of key capabilities. Which ones do you think should be the primary focus in the context of supporting AI efforts at a company?
Okay, that's a great question. I think it's got multiple parts to it. Yeah, certainly I have not experienced any sizable organization that has been able to flip a switch and go from
Yeah.
being ungoverned to being governed very quickly. It needs to be incremental. It needs to again, you're going to find pockets. Some of the things I talked about during the webinar today is kind of pick smaller parts of the
Yeah.
organization, address problems. And so, what should be the primary focus? Well, I always think that the primary focus when you're getting started with any governing effort is to recognize. Notice I don't say the word assign. Recognize the people in the organization that already have accountability for even defining what AI means, for defining how AI will be used, for producing the data associated with using it, and kind of record that. I mean, the catalogs, the tools, just to have a knowledge base of who does what with the data is one of the first things that I would suggest jumping into. Again, you're not going to do this overnight for the entire organization, but do it incrementally. Start with not only a slice of the pie, but maybe even a slice of the pie, and then
Yep.
kind of incrementally expand across the organization. So, yeah, if you're going to try to do the Big Bang Theory, follow the Big Bang Theory, I'm not sure. Come back and tell us if it works for you.
Let me expand on that because, obviously Informatica, we've worked with a lot of customers that have grown and started governance programs. And one of the mistakes that we see is that if the lead is coming from technology, the technical folks, IT, if it is not being led by business, you're at a disadvantage. So you need to get business buy-in, if not coming straight from the business folks. Because if they're not finding value, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. But yeah, exactly what Bob was saying. Start small, grow, and again, identifying those leaders that can help wrangle that information is a key. That's also key.
piling on top of this, reinforcing everything that you've both said, I say begin with the end in mind. And if that was, one of my slides that we read from left to right in terms of a data journey, start at the right. What business problem are we trying to solve? Meaning, get the business involved and let's prioritize this. Let's take a bite-sized chunk of that and say, we think we can solve this, and then work back upstream to govern the correct sets of data that are just necessary to get that objective fulfilled. But do it in a strategic way that leaves it open so you can take down the next project when you win the right to do that.
I don't think I or Stephen Covey could have said it any better. Begin with the end in mind. That's always a good thought.
Apologies for the plagiarism.
Oh, well, thank you all so very much. So many great questions, but I'm afraid that is all the time that we have for this webinar. Feel free to keep the questions coming while I wrap this up, as I'll get those over to Bob and we will get the answers from Bob in the follow-up email. Thank you so much to Informatica and Reltio for sponsoring today's webinar to help make these webinars happen. Matt and Scott, it's been great to have you as part of the discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of our attendees out there who are so engaged in everything that we do. I always just love it. Again, just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Monday for this webinar with links to the slides, links to the recording, and answers to the additional questions. So hope you all have a great day. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.